At the request of the Broadcasting and Recording Services, members and visitors in the public gallery are requested to ensure for the duration of the meeting their mobile phones are turned off completely or switched to airplane safe or flight mode, depending on their device. It is not sufficient to just put your phones on silent mode, as this will maintain a level of interference with the broadcasting system. Before we begin, we will just record our decision on the EU scrutiny, Schedule A, COM 2019-125, on proposal for a decision for the European Parliament and of the Council amending Decision 1313/2013 EU of European Parliament and of the Council on a Union Civil Protection Mechanism. It is proposed that this proposal does not warrant further scrutiny. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Just before, I've just received apologies from Deputy Mick Barry, who won't be here today either. So item number 10 is Local Authority Performance Indicator Report 2017 and related matters. On behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome to today's meeting from the National Oversight and Audit Commission Mr Michael McCarthy and Ms Martina Maloney. Before we begin, just a quick note on privilege. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 172I of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence given to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to so do, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now like to call on Mr Michael McCarthy to make your opening statement and welcome you back to the committee.
Thank you, Catherine, and I want to express our appreciation to yourself and the membership and the Secretariat for extending an invitation to NOAC to appear before this morning's proceedings. I am joined by my colleague Martina Maloney, who is the chair of our subgroup in relation to performance indicators, and also by Neil and Claire in the public gallery, who on behalf of the NOAC Secretariat. I would like to thank the committee for its invitation to meet with you today to discuss the work of the National Oversight and Audit Commission generally, but more specifically its recent performance indicator report for 2017. The annual performance indicator report published by NOAC is one of its key reports every year. NOAC has the function of scrutinising local authority performance against relevant indicators. The performance indicator subgroup's mandate is to recommend appropriate performance indicators in respect of local authority activity and to oversee the data collection, verification, compilation and publication of a report on those indicators annually. NOAC believes that monitoring performance over time and against comparable authorities has the potential to encourage continuous improvement in local authority service provision. And on specifically the issue of performance indicator reports. 4 performance indicator reports have been published by NOAC since 2014. A number of organisations are involved in its production, including the LGMA, 31 local authorities and various government departments. The outcomes of the report should enable best practice be highlighted so that local authorities can learn from each other for the betterment of the services that they provide for their communities. In respect of the 2018 Performance Indicator Report, the data for which is currently being collected, we have added 2 new indicators, bringing the total number to 37. Indicators are kept under ongoing review with the purpose of developing more qualitative outcome-focused indicators as NOAC acquires a greater understanding of local authority functions through its examination of different aspects of the work that they do. NOAC is also beginning to examine the scope for grouping local authorities for comparative reporting purposes. Underpinning the day-to-day work of NOAC is the requirement to see NOAC recognised as an organisation that can deliver real reform. Central to this is making sure that local authorities are delivering real value for money while adhering to proper governance. NOAC also ensures that it supports the best practices that are central to the work of local authorities. Successful transformation requires robust planning, clear and coherent leadership and suitably skilled staff. The impact of increasing demands across local government and the changing landscape in which councils operate mean that planning and oversight has never been more important. Robust plans that project how local authorities' outcomes and priorities will be delivered and funded are essential to ensuring the sustainability of services for the public. It is important that NOAC be there to ensure that these decisions are taken in a planned and coordinated way, and that the impact of decisions on communities and outcomes is transparent and also understood. I look forward to the discussion to follow with committee members on the work of the National Oversight Audit Commission.
Thanks, Michael. So I'll go over to our members, and our first person is Senator Victor Boyhan.
Well, first I'd like to thank Michael and welcome him, and I'm very supportive of NOAC, and I think I'm familiar with the overview of it. I'm not too sure if the public at large are familiar with NOAC, and I think there's a lot of work to be done there in how you promote yourselves and in terms of, setting the standards. Clearly you have a matrix of standards that you judge people from. I want to deal with a few issues. One, I note adequate in relation to your resources. Have you the capacity and the resources? And your predecessor mentioned here previously that there were maybe issues and constraints in terms of the resources. I note your budget is 200,000 there. I see the Minister is giving there last year and this year again. So that's an issue that I wanted to talk about. You say also that you have a second customer survey for users of local authority services, and that you will complete this for further 11 authorities. You might just tell us when that report is due, because I think it's really, really important. And also you mentioned here that you're looking and planning at beginning to examine the possible scope and the potential for grouping local authorities for comparative purposes and exercises. You might just tell us what sort of local authorities you're talking about grouping together, the rationale behind that. And it's very difficult because they're all very, very different in size, in make-up, in a whole range of reasons, but you might look at that. So just some specific questions I want to ask you. Is NOAC satisfied that it has sufficient resources to enable it to carry out its work and its future planned programme? You might explain all that to us. You also mentioned in your report that the Minister can commission, or Government Minister can commission NOAC to do a specific piece of work. Have you been asked in the last 12 months, 24 months, has any Government Minister requested NOAC to specifically deal with a particular issue or project or piece of research? And if so, what was that about and what was the outcome of that? I doubt you may be asked, but you might just touch on that. Does NOAC think that the revisited indicators used to measure housing in 2017 are appropriate? I'd like you to comment on that and tell us the difference and what are the changes, but you might just talk about that. And then there are significant variations amongst the local authorities in processing fire safety certificates within the 2-month time frame that's set down. And can you and NOAC explain the reasons for such variance between 100% for Cork County Council and 10% figure for South Dublin? So I'll just leave you those particular areas and questions.
Thank you, Deputy Boyhan. So, Senator Boyhan, I was promoting you.
I know I'm happy in my current role.
Mea culpa. So just thank you for your contribution. I know, Senator Boyhan, that you've been a very strong supporter of local government itself, and you've brought those issues, to be fair to you, to the floor of Shannon there, and you yourself have given a unique insight into the operation of the local government sector across the various 31 local authorities. So I'm going to talk about the report this year, the capacity and resources, and then Martina, my colleague here, is going to talk about the grouping of the local authorities rationale and the issue in relation to housing. So a quick, short answer to the question, am I happy with the resources that NOAC has? The answer is yes. And I want to pay tribute to my predecessor in this role, who started in 2014 when NOAC was created. And it was a different Ireland, albeit only 5 years ago, in terms of how scarce resources were and the financial difficulties that were presented to the country at that stage. So in recent times we've had an increase in capacity in terms of the Secretariat, and I am very satisfied that the Minister has provided resources to us in that sense. We do rely, and it has to be said, we do rely on the various talents and skill sets of the members of the board, and especially in terms of the project-specific work that is undertaken by the subgroups. And a lot of that is done pro bono by the members of our subgroups. So we do tend to do as much as we can with resources that are sufficient, but they're also finite. And I'm very happy that a capacity and a resource issue doesn't arise therefore. Now, as time goes on, Senator, and as we build up the profile, that's a significant challenge for us, NOAC, to reflect the work that is being done in terms of our interaction with local authorities, with the department, with the LGMA and with the other stakeholders. And since my appointment last September, I'm endeavouring to meet as many of those stakeholders as I can in order to ensure that from our side of the table that we're doing what we can to I think, extend that network and create a reflection of the amount of work that is being done from our perspective. In relation to the question about ministerial requests for reports, the answer is no in short. But I suspect that may change in the future. I don't have any firm knowledge that it may, but I expect in the future that it may do that. But it's prescribed in the Act, so therefore we're open for business in that particular context. But suffice to say, the challenge in terms of building the profile senator is always there. And you will find sometimes, particularly in terms of, we'll say, an interest of a report. I mean, all of our reports are published online. A significant volume of work goes into putting those together from a number of stakeholders. And you'll find this in your own experience, for example, in the campus that is LH, that when you do produce a volume of work, sometimes it's by and large neglected by some organs of society. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone in particular, but sometimes that there mightn't be an appetite, for example, to ingest the news of the day in that report versus, for example, the topical current affairs issues that will always dominate the airwaves and the print media. So I'm going to hand over to Martina, who's going to talk to you about the rationale behind grouping of the local authorities in that housing issue. Martina, as you know, is a former chief executive and has huge experience, and is, to be fair, and I want to put this in the record, has contributed hugely to the work of the performance indicator report and indeed the operations of NOAC as a whole.
Okay, thanks, Chairman. Senator, I suppose the rationale behind the approach to grouping counties arises because, for the very reason you said, it's hard to compare counties. You can hardly compare Dublin City with Leitrim, because obviously you're dealing with two very different areas with different geography, topography and demographic considerations. But there are no doubt some counties that are comparable. So there would be, when we interact with the chief executives, they would have identified that there are counties that they automatically compare with. So if you look at Monaghan and Cavan, for instance, there'd be strong competition between the two of them to see which of them is the best at different things. So they compare with one another. The large counties down the west coast tend to compare. The Donegal, Mayo, Galway and Kerry tend to compare, and there's a rationale behind that comparison as well. And indeed some of the Midland counties, the Laois, Offaly, Longford and Westmeath would be kind of comparable. So what we're trying to do, I suppose, is instill in local authorities the requirement to use the data that we've gathered from all the councils to improve their own performance. So we would be asking them to look at their performance over time. So are they improving year on year? And indeed to use the data for comparable local authorities to see is there something they can learn from similar authorities to build on their practice, to improve their practice and to learn from it. And that's the purpose for us, I suppose, of grouping authorities. And there'll be some authorities which are difficult to identify partners for instance Dublin City Council, which is sort of unique. Your second question focused on the issue of housing indicators, and we've quite a number of indicators in the housing area because we see it as a very important dimension of the work of local authorities that impacts on a lot of our citizenry. So we look at the changes to the housing stock which is owned by the local authorities throughout the year, both in terms of new acquisitions, new construction and also the disposals under the tenant purchase scheme and otherwise. We also look at the housing vacancies in the council housing stock because we're anxious, I suppose, to encourage councils to give the best performance they can in terms of not having properties vacant and indeed turning them around quickly. And over the 4 years that NOAC has been producing this report, we've seen a significant improvement in the level of occupancy of local authority housing. And if I go back to 2014, the figure for vacancies was 3.8% nationally were vacant of social housing stock throughout the country. That figure for 2017 was down to 2.72%, so that's a significant improvement. And indeed, in 13 local authorities, the vacancy rate was less than 2%. The lowest rate in the country was 0.43%. So you can see there's a real effort being made by local authorities in delivering on the occupancy levels and also in the turnaround times when a house does become vacant to make it habitable for the new tenant. A significant reduction in that over the last 4 years. It's now running on average at about 28 weeks, but the lowest or the quickest turnaround time is 6.8 weeks in one local authority. Part of what we do in that is try to encourage best practice. So where we see really good practice, we try to spread that. We hold a conference on an annual basis in collaboration with the LGMA. And one of the showcases we've had was a local authority which had managed to cut that turnaround time down to the minimum possible. So in addition to that, we also look at the cost of housing maintenance per unit of accommodation. And we also look at the private rented inspections, how many houses are being inspected by local authorities, and also we look at the question of the long-term homeless. So you'll appreciate we try to span a number of the important dimensions for the housing service that the local authority carries out. And we changed the indicators in relation to housing output for the 2017 report, really reflecting the changes that come about through Rebuilding Ireland, because I suppose NOAC has to be dynamic, has to respond to changes in government policy. So we've included indicators under HAP and RAS and housing that's delivered through the AHBs as opposed to housing that's delivered also through the local authorities themselves. The third question you asked around the fire safety certificates, and certainly there is a disparity in the figures in relation to how fire safety certificates are processed, and they're a very important dimension to the work of the local authority also. I wouldn't pretend to understand the dynamic that's behind the processing of the fire safety certificates, and indeed what we do is we encourage the audit committees at local level to look at the performance indicators for their particular local authority and review them vis-à-vis other local authorities, and I suppose to ask those questions at local level. And we also, as we meet the chief executives of local authorities on a rotational basis, we also raise with them questions that arise in relation to performance under the different indicators. So it's a question that I think is best referred to the local authority concerned.
Victor, do you want to come back in?
Just wrap up there. I think I would ask that they would look at it again. The fire safety, that is an alarming situation. We had issues about fire safety here a few weeks ago. I'm not going to repeat them. There were various people in here raising very, very serious concerns and allegations in relation to one of the local authorities. And it did get media attention. So I do think it's something we should look at. And I suppose really just to wrap up, two things. I would say to NOAC, and I'd appeal to NOAC, there are in excess of 950, 980 county councillors, and I think they're a conduit to be used better. I find that I am asked to send councillors NOAC's report. It's a rather strange thing. And I think you have a real opportunity to engage, because, you know, there's a view that you're, and I've heard all along, you're talking about the chief executives and the council and you're having conference, but remember, the elected representatives, or the closest politicians to the people on the ground, these sitting county councillors, and I think there's an opportunity to engage better with them and suggest that, you know, when you give out reports, that you circulate to them. You know, I mean, I've heard of reports sitting on chief executives' desks for 2 months before they're circulated to the elected members. The whole thing is mad. It applies to local government audits as well, but that's a matter for later. And then I suppose really the issue of sanction. I mean, what ultimately sanctions can you do other than make a report about shortcomings, you know? So could you just tell us a little bit, and I'm wrapping up at this point, just what powers and sanctions you have, or do you want more powers, or do you want the ability to sanction local authorities? Can you share your view on that?
Thank you, Senator. And I want to take up on the point particularly about the councillors and the conduit that they are. And I've mentioned a number of stakeholders, and they range from the Joint Oireachtas Committee to the Department to the LGMA to the CCMA, and you're absolutely correct. You know, we have over 900 members, or we will in a few weeks' time have 900 new members of local authorities across the 31 local authorities, and that's an avenue that I am going to chase up in terms of using that skill set that exists there. And from our point of view, we can do what we can do, but I do honestly think there's a lot of credence and merit in your proposal that there's a local knowledge, and the elected members in the local authority, and I agree with you in this sense, are best placed to interrogate what the issue might be and have a particular insight into that we will never pick up by just meeting the executive team, and that is something that I will pick up. In relation to sanctions and penalties, there are none. I mean, our role is specified in the Act, Senator, and it's an oversight. It's an oversight role by and large, but and without the carrot and stick. There's a bit of carrot here in terms of, and you saw the point that Martina had mentioned in relation to the number of voids, and that used to just drive me bananas as a public representative in a previous life. I just couldn't understand why the voids issue was allowed to deteriorate to the level at which it had at that point in time. But we have seen a reduction in that overall figure from 3.8 to 2.8. And we believe that from our side of the coin, that's directly responsible for our site visits and the reports that we have. And it places a pressure on them, but I'm going to take you up on that issue in relation to the councillors, the network, the association behind that, because there's a particular skill set within that particular sector that I think would be of huge benefit to NOAC in terms of how we discharge our own functions. Fergus.
Thank you, Chairperson. Can I welcome our witnesses today? And obviously, I have to acknowledge Martina Maloney as the former manager. Not just that, but she's really an extremely helpful, proactive, one of the best dedicated public officials I've ever had the pleasure to work with. And I think your wealth of experience, along with your chairperson, and the work that you do is highly valuable. And obviously, I'm not here to. I'm here to be fair to everybody, and I recognise and acknowledge all of the expertise and work and good work that is done right around the country. But I do have an issue of concern, and I hope it might be something which NOAC could look into, because it's about oversight of the way people with disabilities are being dealt with across local government. And it continues to be a concern of mine. And this is no reflection on any individual, any local authority. I want to stress that absolutely, that we're not paying and we're not showing due respect for people with disabilities as we deal with their problems. Like, for instance, I have a case which came to me this week. It's written to the mother of a disabled child, and the person who has a disability is referred entirely in the letter in the third person as the disabled person, rather than your son or your daughter. And I find that disgraceful. And I just, it makes me so angry that people who fight for their rights for their children are treated disrespectfully. And it just makes me very angry, and that's why I'm raising it here. It makes me angry because yesterday when I came to this house, outside the door of Leinster House, there were 2 rows of people in wheelchairs who needed and weren't getting the home care packages they need. I know that's not your concern, but it is my concern. And they were there in the rain, and it was, it's absolutely unacceptable in my view that people with disabilities who need care, who need attention, are not being treated, in my view, properly, and their rights are being disrespected. Now, in this particular case, the difficulty with the case I have here is that there's a report from and I'm not going to, obviously, this person couldn't be recognised with what I'm going to say, but they have a visual impairment, complex physical intellectual difficulties, require to be peg-fed and requires frequent suctioning. They have nursing care at night and they need 24-hour care. Now, the Health Board wrote on behalf of that person to the council asking that they would be given a special bath and a special hoist because of their significant disabilities. And while the council refers to them in the third party, they ignore absolutely their needs. And the last line is, your application is hereby refused. And they treat them with such disrespect. So I would ask, now I know this is just one case, but to me it shouldn't be happening. And I would ask that you would do, as a matter of urgency, look at the language that is used in letters to people with disabilities. And if it is disrespectful, that the council are dealt with severely. And so you can't treat people like that. And secondly, if somebody has complex disability needs, and if they have a HSE report from a state physiotherapist and doctors saying that they need something, it's not good enough for the council, who own the house, to say to that mother, we don't do this, we don't put in those house, and to hell with your application, is closed now. But by the way, the very last line, if you want to appeal it, you can do it in 21 days, and here's the address to appeal to. So, I think that's wrong, and I just reject it totally. And I think the one thing you could do constructively, and a lot of the work you do obviously is constructive, is that you would examine as a matter of urgency the letters that are sent out and meet with the officers who deal with those. Whether it's the, I presume the chief executive officers, and work out a language that is respectful and understanding, and take special and particular care for people with disabilities. Now, quite often the local authority may not have the money to do the work, and I accept that, and I accept that it's the government job to make sure that the money is provided. But I think within all of that, we need a far greater emphasis on the rights of people with disabilities and their families. And I don't ever want to go into a house again to listen to somebody with a huge issue that has been completely ignored and been left in a dreadful situation that we have to deal with now. And I'm not disrespecting the people who wrote that letter. I'm just saying they need to be trained in appropriate and proper language. And obviously they need to, we need a far more respectful, I suppose, empathetic relationship. I think that's hugely important. The other point I want to make is that as regards your reports, I again, and I'm not nitpicking here, we don't have a particular report today to go through with you. I understand, if I've read it right, that your indications report is coming later this year, so maybe that's incorrect, the information I have. Apologies.
Report, Deputy, is due later this year, but we are discussing the performance indicators report for 2017 right now.
Right, okay, well, could we have, whenever it's ready, maybe I think the key thing is to have the meeting at that time. Once it's ready, I would suggest we meet straight away and go through it, because it's hot and it's live and it's there in black and white, and people would pay more attention to it. The other point I want to make is about people generally, the way people interact with their local authority. I've always believed that if somebody has an issue, that they should be able to discuss it privately with their council. Now, and I know that some councils have rooms available and some councils don't, but I think it's hugely important that if I walk up to, say, there's 4 or 5 windows that you knock and say, hey, can you help me, please? That a person should be able to request, respectfully say, listen, I'd like to speak to somebody privately about my issue. And because otherwise, other people are listening in a public place to everybody's problems and the issues that they have. So I think what's hugely important is that, that place where somebody who has an issue, a serious issue that they want to discuss, that they go into a room and they sit down and talk to the person concerned. And I think that's respectful of that person. I think it's wrong that people should have to stand in line or should be in a public place discussing their business where anybody is in earshot of them can hear everything that's going on. And I think that's wrong. And I think we should address that. And if it means you have to put more rooms available to the public, well, then I think we should do that. And I think that it's showing respect for the individual at the point of interaction. So the other points I feel is another point I want to raise, where the public press will tell you that there's a significant problem between the administration and the elected representatives. I'm not saying anywhere or any place, but do you deal with that, or if there's significant and serious difficulties between a manager of a county and its public representatives, and it's continual and ongoing and doesn't seem to be resolvable, what solutions, if any, can you offer to that? Is there best practice? Could you, as a body, say, look, we've met with, you say, well, you're doing, just to take for instance, you're doing your audit of so many councils, and that in those audits perhaps you would review the press commentary for the previous 6 months to see, well, what is going on there, what is happening, what are the issues, and that you might be able to sort issues out that do arise. Because you may have cases where senior officials or their senior official may not attend it in a particular town, will not attend meetings there. Now, there may be reasons, good reasons, I don't know, because I'm not on that particular council, but it does happen. And it's not acceptable that it should continue to happen. There should be a way to intervene, like, I'm not saying necessarily you guys, but somebody should be able to say, look, It's the role of the manager of the council to work together. There's clearly a dysfunctional council here because it's not working. And without attributing blame, is to make it work. Because it's just it's just a serious issue. And I know it may be a rare issue, but it is happening, and it does need to be addressed. So, with those kind words, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Fergus. Over, Michael.
Deputy O'Dowd, thank you very much for raising those issues. And just in relation to the first issue that you have raised, when I was a deputy, I had a similar issue in relation to, and it actually happened to be a local authority. It was a housing case, and it was quite complex, and it wasn't the standard housing, application and verification and the usual. This is very different. And I think it was reflective of how fast we change as a society. And I felt as aggrieved and as angry as you do now in relation to the outcome. And it referred to a family whose eldest daughter was on the spectrum in terms of autism. And there was no special consideration, or there was no extra consideration given to that application because of the specific needs. And once you went to interrogate the case, it was fairly obvious that this wasn't a run-of-the-mill case. And to be fair to the local authority, there was nothing within their remit that could have treated this case differently. Now, they were very courteous and they were polite and all of that, but there was no outcome. And as a result, I introduced the first ever, and you recall this, Deputy, from 2012, I introduced as a Deputy the first ever autism-specific legislation in the House. And it won cross-party political support, and it is now, I believe, being dealt with in the Senate. Dr. James Riley, the former Minister for Health, is now pursuing the bill in all but name, I think, in the context of his role as a senator. But what it required organs of the state to do was to provide an autism strategy, and therefore there were certain statutory legislative obligations that will result in a situation whereby, if that family were to happen post-enactment of the legislation, to go back through that system again, there was a requirement of the local authority to act differently in terms of the housing need of that family because of the autism condition.
Wait, can I just the point you're making here? Yeah, I accept and welcome all, and that's all excellent, and I praise all that. But the point is, in this case, they're saying, you're a non-person, you don't have a name, your problem, we don't deal with it, so go somewhere else. And the HSC are saying it's a matter, I didn't say this point earlier, it's a matter for the council. The council are saying it's a matter for the HSC. Meanwhile, this poor mother's in a dreadful situation. And what I'm trying to say is this, that I know this is an exceptional case, and I accept and acknowledge that. And without appropriate, I'm not putting blame on any personal individual, but the system is rotten if it can't deal with it properly. And if everything else is so perfect, why can't we have a process in a case like this that the fundamental training of the individuals concerned on the profession, on the local authority and the health board side, that to say, geez, look, I'll pick up the phone and I'll talk to Mary about this. That's not happening. There's no, and I'm just saying that you should audit that and you should highlight, hopefully, a positive, like you're saying, a constructive engagement that is respectful and gets the action that's needed. And I appreciate the good work you've done. I'm not taking...
So it was a similar... So the point is making essentially was a similar experience. So in relation to this particular case, what we do is I'll go back to the full board of NOAC in terms of the performance indicator and look at it from that context. Is there anything we can do from the NOAC perspective that can ensure that we can monitor or audit or evaluate that particular channel? So I take that to the full board, Deputy, and I'll get directly back.
Could I ask that you would ask the ones that have been refused? Because I think that's where the problem is. Because if they're being dealt with, they're dealt with. Because it's the ones that are refused are the ones I worry about, because they are exceptions. But, it's just a bureaucratic madness.
So look, I give that commitment. We'll take it back to the NOAC board in terms of tweaking the performance indicator to include that for that particular sector. Just in relation to the functions of, and I've set them out in my opening statement, we don't have a role in terms of where there's going to be a conflict between, we'll say executive and our elected members, and I'm not entirely sure there's an appetite there to have that. But we have set out clearly what the role is. And in relation to the agenda for today is actually the 2017 report. I think you've a copy of it there. And we're nearing the completion of the 2018, and we'll come back in due course to discuss when that's ready. But I'll come back to you on that other issue, Deputy.
Could I ask if Martin would say something on that issue as an administrator? Is there a mechanism, that could be put in place that would automatically refer these. If it's refused, there should be a referral to somebody who may have a greater knowledge of the specific area.
I suppose you raised a number of issues in relation to that particular case, Deputy. I suppose, to me, the description you give is really of a customer service issue, and customer service is one of the elements within which NOAC has a remit, but not dealing with individual cases. We have a remit in relation to reviewing the customer service provided by local authorities, and in fact to date NOAC has done 2 surveys completed, one a tenant survey in December 2015, the outcome of which was quite positive, and another survey, local authority satisfaction survey, which was completed in 2018. There's another survey completed for another 11 local authorities, which will be brought forward this year. I suppose my understanding is that local authorities in general have a strategy for dealing with people with disability, and each local authority would have that strategy. What we could do is review it in the context of customer service, or indeed in the context of the support that's provided by local authorities to people with disability. But it would have to be, our role is oversight. It's not looking at individual cases.
But notwithstanding that and accepting that that's what it is, nevertheless, you could make sure that that you would review on a customer level what type of letters are sent. If the person is always named in them with a disability, which I think is an absolute essential, and also that there is a referral. If it's going to be a no, then there should be a further referral in the system back up to say, well, look, have we really looked at all of this? Is this a fair and accurate conclusion in this case? That's sort of oversight.
I understand what you're saying.
And I think that's essential. And I also think that's finally in this one that I don't know if you have an advocate on your board, and I think it's probably pointed by the Minister, for a person representing people with disabilities. But if there isn't, I think that would be a useful membership of your board if that's such a person were on your board, because they would give a perspective that is essential to the functioning of local authority.
Okay, Owen.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies for being late. Just maybe a couple of comments and then some questions. First of all, just to commend NOAC, I'm a big fan and supporter of the work that you do. I think those of us here in the committee who spend a lot of time trying to get a read on what's exactly going on in local authorities really value the annual reports that you do and kind of wait with them with a certain amount of anticipation, which probably says we need to get out more often, but it is really, really valuable information. So just, I sometimes think that organisations like yourselves who put a huge amount of time in collating this and publishing this, maybe sometimes wonder, is anybody listening or paying attention? Certainly there are many members in this committee that are, and if we could get more of this kind of information more frequently, we'd all be much better off. So I genuinely want to compliment you on that. I also think, Chair, it might be useful when the 2018 report is out to get you back in very quickly after that, and that was obviously said before. We've started to do that with a number of agencies, like the Environmental Protection Agency, for example, do really important reports, and we've given a commitment to this committee that when they're published, they will let us know in advance and we'll schedule them in so that, because we normally schedule 2 or 3 months in advance. So if we know the date you intend to publish the 2018 report as early as possible, we can try and facilitate you in, because the 2017 report was great, but obviously it's a little bit dated for our purposes. I also think if we do bring you in on the 2018 report, it would be good to have an opportunity at that point for maybe us, and I'm sure other members have done this already, to flag things that maybe some of us would like to see in the 2019 report. Do you know what I mean? It's, again, we're doing this with some of the agencies, is to see what information do we think would be useful to track, etc. Because I have to say, I torture a lot of local authorities with FOIs to get additional information. For example, I'm doing a piece of work at the minute on the number of houses that are being built and in stock that are fully wheelchair accessible. Right? So most local authorities can tell me how many adapted houses they have, but they just can't tell you if they're built and designed for people who live in the properties with wheelchairs. And in fact, some of them can't even tell you any information at all. So I have some sympathy for what you struggle with. My 2 questions are this. My own experience is there's a very mixed bag of quality responses from local authorities in terms of information requests. Some give really good quality information, some give very poor. Is that a fair kind of comment? I'm not asking you to name individual local authorities, but is there anything we can do to assist to try and improve in terms of our engagement with the department, improve the quality and the consistency of information? Because obviously that's key for yourselves. I note, I think it is in the 2017 report, or it could have been the 2016 one, there had been a problem with the return of data in terms of household completions, which meant that you didn't feel in a position to authoritatively say what the actual output of local authority houses were. And obviously, I mean, if you guys can't do it, obviously nobody else can. So is there anything we can do to assist in that? That's the first question. The second question is, we've been having a conversation inside our own party about the audit element of local authorities. So, for example, we have PAC, and PAC has quite significant powers to hold accounting officers and government departments to account. No similar function exists for local authorities, I mean, in terms of the kind of the public scrutiny. And I'm wondering, what would be the best way, or do you have views on how to strengthen not just the oversight role and the data publication, but that accountability role? Because obviously there are audits of local authorities, they're published on the department's website, and then they just quietly disappear and nobody pays any attention afterwards. Do you think there's a role for the Oireachtas? You know, could you have a standalone committee that would have functions similar to PAC, but specifically looking at local authorities? Is that something you've thought about or teased out about? And is there advice you can give us for those of us that would like to see greater scrutiny, both to commend those local authorities that are doing a good job, and there's lots of them doing really good work, but also where some aren't, or where there are some issues, how we challenge that? My last question, and I know it's a sensitive issue, is how we deal with allegations of improper practice or allegations of fraud in local authorities. And again, I'm not going to name any particular instance, but for example, you know, there are instances where very serious allegations have been made against local authorities on planning matters, or very serious allegations have been made against local authorities in terms of payment of contractors and subcontractors. And my understanding is, in those instances, there's a kind of a in-house process where the local authority kind of investigates, and then, you know, if those things then need to be handed on to other appropriate authorities, they're handed on. Again, in terms of, I suppose, that audit bit of when things or allegations are made, does NOAC have views on what's best practice? Is there need for legislative reform or institutional reform? Because I do know there's been a very high-profile case in one local authority in the Northwest, which has been widely reported in newspapers, and the department has been investigating this matter now for quite a number of years. The case was in the High Court, and so for somebody who's trying to get to a conclusion of a case like that, it's a very, very opaque and impenetrable process. And I'm wondering, have you thoughts on that you'd like to share with the committee? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Deputy O'Brien. So I'm going to deal with the issue in relation to the reports, and then I'm going to deal specifically with the issue in relation to the audit type PAC type issue, and also the other issue in relation to planning issues or allegations, so on and so forth. The quality of the replies in the data collection, Martin is going to answer those. Okay. So I think it's a very good. It's a very good exercise that we're in front of the JOC, and I had this discussion with Senator Boyhan. We have a particular challenge in NOAC to raise the profile of what we are doing. There's a very good board, there's a very good mix of skill set, and a lot of the work, for example, in building our subgroup on performance indicators is chaired by Martina, and they have literally burnt the midnight oil in putting the effort into that to collate the data to present the reports. And in relation to your point about the upcoming 2018 report, I will certainly do that. I will contact the Secretariat and let you know what chronological stage that is at, so that you can tie that in with another visit by NOAC to the JOC. I think it's very, very good. And it is good that we're having a conversation, but I take your point, it's the 2017 report, and we're now into Q2 2018. Yeah, the whole idea of that type of audit PAC style system, that actually reflects a number of viewpoints held by those of us in NOAC, and indeed those of us outside that. And I've said about the functions of NOAC in terms of my opening statement, it's very much about scrutinising, and it's about the oversight role. Like, there is no direct role there, for example, in relation to sanctions, so on and so forth. And we take a very, I suppose, a proactive approach. In terms of the visits, for example, to local authorities, we find out what they're doing well. We know from the same type of visits where other local authorities aren't doing as well. And we balance that information into the mix. Those reports are becoming embedded in the local authorities. We do send the reports, we put them up on the website, send them out to local authorities, and it ties into the challenge we have in terms of our own profile around that. And your question has a lot of merit in terms of that forum where you have a PSC type, focus in relation to that aspect of local authorities in terms of the chief executive's role. And in many ways, NOAC was born out of that kind of discussion back in the 2013-2014 period. So I've had a discussion with the Minister in terms of how we can progress that. And we're at a very embryonic stage in terms of a forum that can kind of meet those those demands and those requirements. So, for example, something along the lines of the police authority, where they have public sittings and they're televised and they're online, that element of oversight and transparency, I think that would be good for NOAC. And it would also be good in terms of showing the outside world the discussions that we would be having with the chief executives. But other than to say that's a conversational stage at the moment. But it ties in very much because that's a view that the number of people have had. And there was a discussion, I think, in the Shannon back around last November where that particular aspect of that possible type forum was raised, and as a result of that I had a discussion with the Minister along those lines. So I'm going to hand over, just in relation to the allegations and that type, we don't have a role in terms of sanctions or allegations. Suffice to say that the Office of the Planning Regulator has been established in recent times, and I don't even know, I'm not professing to know whether there's a remit within the role of the Office of the Planning Regulator, but again it's another layer of I suppose, of accountability, another layer by which people can pursue that. And I share your frustrations in terms of and I was that soldier, you put on a parliamentary question, you're looking for information, you're trying to collate data, and then the reply comes in and you're saying, God, there's still a significant amount of work to be done. But we're very open in terms of NOAC with our interaction with the Joint Oireachtas Committee to provide that element of reports. A finished volume report is a very important piece of work to someone like yourself, Deputy, who is building that knowledge in that particular sector across local authorities. It's very important to have that. We work in conjunction with other stakeholders in terms of collating, compiling that data, and we want to make sure that this is as widely available and widely read, and so far as we can handle that process, because as you know yourself, you put a huge effort into putting together a piece of work, and it's dismissed almost or almost ignored, and that can be quite frustrating. So in terms of the 2018 report, we'll get a note back to the Secretariat to give you an idea of the chronological stage we're currently at, so we can tie in with a visit with the GOC to discuss that report, and I think in a timely manner.
Okay, Deputy, I'll deal with the questions you had about data quality issues. And I suppose I have certain sympathy for local authorities who can be working on archaic systems at times. As you've identified, the provision of data that's accurate and timely to us is really important to us. And we have put in place a system over the last 4 years that is working quite well now. And I am much more confident in relation to the quality of the data we're getting in for the performance indicators. It has been a journey for us, and I suppose what we do, the way we approach it, is every year we issue guidelines to the local authority in relation to how to calculate the particular indicators that we're looking for. And if we've any queries, the Secretariat, who are represented behind you there, deal with the queries in relation to interpretation. We also do a random audit of different local authorities in relation to the data gathering. We select a number of indicators each year, and we go to 6 local authorities each year, go through those 6 indicators with them and make sure that the processes underpinning them are accurate and verify that the data that we're getting is accurate. So certainly that has been very beneficial for us in improving the quality of the data. I suppose the issue that arose in relation to the data in the 2016 report in relation to housing arose because, I think, of the changes associated with the implementation of Rebuilding Ireland, the changing requirements and the changing definitions. And that's why, when we tried to, I suppose, balance the figures independently against departmental figures, there were some issues thrown up for us in relation to what category what was in. And it really took us the year to resolve that, but we're now very satisfied with the robust system we have in place for the gathering of the housing data. Hence, it was published in the 2017 report.
And just 2 follow-ups. Thank you for all of that. And I do think this committee and lots of members of it would like to see you have a higher profile in the debate because of the information you provide. I think a couple of areas for future reports, particularly given some of the new requirements in terms of the near zero energy building requirements, is to start providing some data around that and data around the BER ratings of the public housing stock that's there. I know the CSO does some of that, but it's not necessarily as clear as maybe some of your own reporting would be, and I think that would be really helpful, because obviously we have the 2018 and the 2020 requirements in terms of public buildings and the NZ requirements. And I put in questions to both housing and communication and climate action, and both have come back to me saying that it's not their job to monitor compliance with those legal requirements of the EU legislation. So it's not clear whose job is to monitor it. You know, housing produces the planning guidelines, climate action produces some of the supports, but nobody's tracking it, and it might be a useful role for yourselves. Likewise, I do think, like, we've done a lot of work in this committee around, for example, the underspend and traveller accommodation. I know Fergus was raising issues of disability, and I was raising, wheelchair accessibility. While the headline figures are really, really important, I also think we need to start tracking, all of us, those sections of society who, even as housing output is increasing, maybe not as fast as many of us would like, groups of society could still get left behind. And I think the more information we have about those sectors, the better. The other big gripe many of us have is the issue of voids. Like, you guys did a really, really important report, I think it was published in 2016 on data sometime earlier, which really kind of exposed the scandal that was the long-term voids. And the great thing about that report wasn't just the headline figures, but you were able to timeline how long these properties had been void, etc. We've ended up in quite a dispute with the Minister over what the department is now calling voids. So we had Brendan Kenny, for example, come into the committee from Dublin City Council and tell us in last year's housing output figures there were no long-term voids returned to stock. What there were standard relets or casual vacancies, some of which came under a €40,000 refurb figure, some of came over the 40,000, but they were all, in his view, casual relets. In the department's figures, they had a figure of 500 voids returned to stock. And the importance is a casual relet isn't an addition to stock, and therefore in your annual output figures, there's no net increase from casual relets. Whereas if they take casual relets at department level and reclassify them as voids, they are classified as additions to stock. And when we questioned the Minister on this after Brendan Kenny was in, the Minister was saying, but we're giving extra funding. If we didn't give that extra funding, those units would become long-term voids, right? Which seems to me, just from a statistical point of view, a very peculiar way of counting. Right now, I'm very clear, for something to be considered a long-term void, it has to have fallen out of stock for quite some time and require a significant amount of money and work to be brought back in. And the value of your report was we could see short-term, medium-term and long-term voids. So I do think that's one area where some very clear, independent data from yourselves, I think, would be really helpful, because, like, I put in a number of PQs saying of the whatever the figure they had for the total output of voids last year, how long were those units vacant, right? Because for me, that's a key determinant. And they won't give us the data. Now, they say they don't collate that data at the departmental level. So I do think that's something that would be really useful for you guys to look at, if it's not in the report, but maybe for a future report. Because I'm finding an increasing number of anomalies between how local authorities are categorising things and how the department are categorising things. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but I'm very clear in my own mind that the department, or at some level, there are political considerations infecting classifications which should be done statistically. I mean, we had it with the house completions. It was given to the CSO, and now we have a really good data set where we know the annual number of completions in the sector. I think there's other areas of housing data we need to do that, and I think NOAC is well placed to provide some of that.
Thank you, Deputy O'Brien. Yeah, I share your frustration in relation to the voids issue. We had this discussion earlier, and I agree with you. I mean, your definition of a void is something that has been empty or vacant for a long time and has fallen out of stock. That was my 100% definition of that. And we had a number of, in a previous incarnation, we had a number of issues of those in my electoral area, the electoral area that I represented in the local authority at one stage. And it went on for years. I mean, there was no doubt about it. You could see in the local community, you could see the structure, it hadn't changed in appearance, bar its deterioration. There was a lost revenue in terms of the differential rent that should have been collected. And there was a tenant, or there were a number of tenants, or a family, or whatever, who weren't being housed because of that inertia. And I think it's a particularly good piece of work on part of NOAC that we've concentrated on that voids issue. And you know my definition of a void. But we've seen the figure over a number of years reduced from 3.8% to 2.8%. Now, that's not the silver bullet, but at least it's a figure heading in the right direction. And I want to give you this commitment that in terms of how we progress that work, that we will continue in terms of our data collection, that will make it easily discernible to other people who are in that space, to be able to build a sufficient research bank of knowledge on that topic, and to do that in an objective and an accurate manner. That's really important. The issue in relation to the PQs from DCCE, the Department of Communications, Climate Action and the Environment, and the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, again, I've been that soldier, and it can be utterly frustrating too. So that's a point that I will take on board in terms of how we tweak the performance indicators. Because as we go forward, circumstances will change, some issues will become topical, some will become less topical, and we're going to tweak and add the performance indicators as we make that journey. And in conclusion, I want to give you the, I want to give you this offer of, well, look, we're here to do the job that we have to do. And I'm particularly encouraged to see someone of your own standing, both as a researcher and writer, but also as a Dáil Deputy, who has a very strong interest in building that data. And that really reflects what we're doing. And we are available to you in that capacity in any way that can be constructive and that can add to those particular outcomes in terms of building that data. And we'll get that note to the Secretariat in relation to where we're at with the 2018 report, so that we get it back in here and it's more, I suppose, more timely. Because I know when you look at an agenda and you see a report and stated from 2 years ago that the data is, in the meantime, circumstances have changed, there have been developments, and I think it's in all of our interest to be more timely in terms of that respect.
Maybe can I just ask you a few questions as well? And I want to first of all acknowledge the work that you do and the reports are so valuable. Sometimes I wish they were acted on a bit quicker than what they are. But listen, it's a huge database of information that we can access and get a better understanding of how the local authorities are working. Just in relation to a few maybe specific areas, you do say there's an improvement in the commercial rates collection across, and maybe if you could expand on that. And maybe another issue that's come up in my own county that has just gone through a revaluation process, a slight anomaly where the utilities are globally valued in the same year. That local authority doesn't get the benefit of that global revaluation of the utilities because they cannot increase the amount of revenue generated from the commercial rates. And it's just having an effect on us, and maybe is there a policy around that we could possibly look at moving forward? And another indifference I've found out, and it's how different local authorities report on things, is in relation to bad debts provision. And some local authorities, when they're presenting their information, they present commercial rates as the total 100% that's available for collection. And then at the end of the year, you see how much you actually collect. Whereas in relation to social housing rent, sometimes some local authorities give you a figure that's already has bad debt provision allowed in it, and then you're seeing your collection rates then are slightly skewed because the figure you're presented in the estimates is net of a bad debt provision, whereas in commercial rates in some local authorities it's the full 100%. And later on you see the exact figure that they're providing for bad debt. It's just when you look at collection rates, sometimes you see very high social housing rent collection rates, but that's because the highline figure already includes the bad debt provision. Just some anomalies I've related to that. Just in relation to 2017 reports, the variations of how local authorities record the Part 5 units. Maybe he can expand on exactly what you mean in relation to that. I have an issue in relation to what in relation to the whole forest certification process, it's clearly saying here that a lot of local authorities don't deal within it within the 2 months. Like, what happens then if it's not dealt with? Is this a fact that there's not a statutory time frame on dealing with it? Does it prevent buildings commencing, or what are the implications of it not being dealt within the 2 months? And have we any figures of saying of, and maybe you do have, of how many inspections of the properties are carried out after the building has been completed in relation to fire certification? And I suppose that feeds into the other one, I suppose, which is sort of tied into it, is in relation to improved planning inspections. And when you say planning inspections, are you referring to building control or planning itself? Because there's two different parts to that, I think, and maybe if you could give me an insight on that. Just one other thing that I'm sort of wondering whether this should be under the local authorities anymore is in relation to the compliance with the drinking water regulation. So that report is still coming under the obligation of the local authorities, even though it's realistically at this stage should be the responsibility of Irish Water. And maybe if you could make a comment on that. You do say in your reports that the number of inspections of properties is not adequate and it's not sufficient. But those that we have inspected, there's a 79% of non-compliance with them, which is quite staggering when you think, number one, we're not inspecting enough properties, and out of the ones we're inspecting, 79% are non-compliant. And maybe you could expand on them few points. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ciarán. So, Ciarán, I'll start with the last point first. And Martina's going to touch on, again, because as you know, Martina's chair of our performance indicator subgroup, and I think we'll explain in terms of the indicator and the remit that we have around that indicator, for example, in the areas we constrain to and that we can't. And on the compliance with the Drinking Water Directive, I think, you know, there's merit in what you're saying, but our role is an oversight role, and we have a role in terms of the implementation of national policy, but that's really an issue, we'll say, for the Minister of the day or the government of the day. But I can see the merit in that. Just before I call on Martina, who'll talk a bit about the rates issue, we did go to one particular local authority, and they had an improvement in relation to their collection of commercial rates, and it really centred around, it was just after the economic crash. It was a county that wasn't doing as well, for example, during the boom as other counties on the eastern seaboard or down in the southwest may have been doing. So therefore, when the recession came, it was particularly hit. And as a result, a lot of businesses had either struggled, if they were lucky enough to stay open, and a vast majority of them had closed. And what they did in their finance unit was they went out and they met those who were still in business, because their modus operandi was to keep the doors of that business open, because if it was gone, there was a loss to the local area, there was an economic loss, and they would never see the rate being collected at that point in time. So there was a bit of discussion between the finance department, and they entered into arrangements with these whose accounts had fallen to arrears, and who were just about keeping their doors open. And that was responsible, in part at least, for some of the upturn in the collection of the commercial rate in that particular jurisdiction. But then again, I think the point is important. Across the 31 local authorities, Caherlick, you will see some local authorities doing business very differently in a way to their neighbouring local authority. And your experience, for example, in Kildare, or someone else's experience in Kerry or in Galway, would vary greatly. And that's why, from our perspective, in collecting that data, we try to understand how they arrive at that, and we present the data in a way that's easily discernible, and that we can use that data to improve the service provision in other areas. And again, the role is prescribed in the Act, and it prevents us from having certain functions around that, other than to say we could have a point of view, but it's venturing out of our zone, so to speak.
Okay. Chairman, I suppose just to clarify in relation to the commercial rates collection that you mentioned, the local government sector as a whole implemented a comprehensive debt management programme that involved improved processes, alignment of reporting methods and training for staff in relation to the collection of debt, because during the recession quite an amount of debt had built up in the rate collection area. And to be fair to local authorities, the collection percentage has improved and continues to improve. And in the 2017 report, 21 of the 31 local authorities had actually shown an improvement on previous years. And the mean level of commercial rates collection has increased from 82% in 2016 to 83.6% in 2017. So there's evidence of improved performance there. In relation to the position on bad debt, the figures that we utilise for this particular process, we're very clear in the guidelines we issue in relation to how bad debts are utilised in calculating the percentage collection. So bad debts have to be excluded. In other words, they're written off in advance of the calculation that we have here. In relation to the fire certification process, I suppose the indicator we have is trying to identify the level of certification that's achieved within 2 months. Now, in the event that it's not achieved within 2 months, there is a statutory provision which allows for an extension of time from the applicant, because on occasion the local authority will need to go back to the applicant looking for further information and so on. So that accounts for some of the reasons why they're not all delivered within the 2 months period. We have no indicator in relation to post-inspections. So after the building is constructed, where the fire safety certificate has been issued, we don't have an indicator to measure performance in that area. You mentioned the building control area, and it's an area that NOAC has brought to the attention in the report, in that the level of inspections in some authorities doesn't meet the minimum that you would hope for. And certainly the issue that you've raised around the 79% non-compliance is significant. From our interactions with individual local authorities in relation to that non-compliance, some of the non-compliances are, I suppose, relatively minor in nature and are resolved within a reasonable period of time. So it might be, for instance, in relation to smoke alarms or in relation to extinguishers. So it brings to the attention of the owner of the property what's required to be done, and they do tend to get addressed, is the information we've been given in interaction with the local authorities. In relation to the drinking water performance indicator that we have here, this particular drinking water indicator is for the schemes that have not transferred to Irish Water. So it's the group schemes, which remain within the responsibility of the local authority. Okay.
Come in there. No. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, I would like to thank our witnesses for attending today and engaging with the committee. I propose we suspend the meeting briefly to allow our second set of witnesses to enter and take seats. Thank you very much. All right. At the request of the broadcasting and recording service, members and visitors in the public area are requested to ensure that for the duration of the meeting their mobile phones are turned off completely or switched to airplane safe or flight mode depending on their device. It is not sufficient to just put phones on silent mode, as they will maintain a level of interference with the broadcasting system. Our next section of today's committees is an overview of the work of the Local Government Audit Service 2017 and related matters. On behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome to today's meeting from the Local Government Audit Service, Ms Niamh Larkin, Director of the Audit, and Mr Richard Murphy. Just a quick note on privilege before we start. Before we begin, I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(1) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible you should not criticise nor make charges against any persons or entity by name or in such way as to make him or her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official either by name or in such way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now call on Ms Larkin to make her opening statement. Thank you.
The Local Government Audit Service performs the independent external audit of local government as established by the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government. The Local Government Audit Service audits the annual financial statements of local authorities, including regional authorities, motor taxation offices and other bodies. The Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government appoints auditors, known as local government auditors, to carry out or assist in the carrying out of audits of local authorities and other bodies. All local government auditors are qualified accountants and recruited following open public competitions. Each local government auditor is assigned an audit district under warrant of authority from the Director of Audit. Local government auditors are independent of the department when discharging their professional functions. This independence is protected in legislation in accordance with Section 1162 of the Local Government Act 2001. The Local Government Act 2001 sets out the primary duties of the local government auditor as follows. In the course of the audit of accounts of the local authority or other body, the local government auditor shall carry out such audit tests as he or she considers appropriate in order to be satisfied as to whether the annual financial statement is prepared in accordance with Section 108 or the accounting requirements otherwise applicable to the body concerned, whether the annual financial statements present fairly the financial position of the authority or other body and of its income and expenditure for the period in question, and whether the transactions of the audited body conform to the statutory or other authorisation under which they purport to have been carried out. There are a number of outputs from the audit. Following the audit, each local government auditor issues an audit opinion, an audit report and a management letter to the Chief Executive of the local authority. The audit opinion. It is the local government auditor's main statutory duty, following completion of the financial audit, to give his or her independent audit opinion on the annual financial statements of the audited body, as to whether it represents fairly the financial position of the audited body and of its income and expenditure for the period under audit. The audit report. In addition to the audit opinion, it is custom and practice to issue statutory audit reports covering any matter or matters which the auditor considers should be reported. The Chief Executive of a local authority is required to respond to this report, and his or her comments shall be included, if of material significance, as part of the final report. This procedure has enhanced public scrutiny of local government, as management responses to address the issues raised at audit now form part of the published audit reports. The management letter. In accordance with international standards in auditing, an auditor may issue a management letter drawing attention to any weakness in financial procedures and/or internal controls identified during audit and make appropriate recommendations. The overview of the work of the Local Government Audit Service report. This report provides an overview of the work of the Local Government Audit Service in delivering on a statutory remit of providing the external audit of local government in accordance with Section 114 to 126 of the Local Government Act 2001 as amended by the Local Government Reform Act 2014. The report is divided into 3 sections as follows. Section 1 looks at the role of the Local Government Audit Service and the legislation that governs it. It details the various relationships the Local Government Audit Service has with other bodies, including local authorities, their audit committees, NOAC and the Office of the Controller and Auditor General. It also highlights the role the Value for Money Unit plays in assisting local authorities to learn from best practice. Section 2 of the report summarises the financial performance of the 31 local authorities audited for the year ended 31st December 2017. It details the main sources of both revenue and capital income and expenditure, together with historic data, so that comparisons can be made. It details the values of assets under the control of the local authorities and the liabilities that they face in the short to long term. Section 3 of the report outlines some of the findings included in some of the local government auditors' reports and opinions. The findings are set out under the following headings for the purpose of the overview report: financial standing, income collection, unfunded capital balances, capital projects, loans payable, development contributions, fixed assets, transfers of assets to Irish Water, procurement and purchasing, local authority companies, governance, internal audit and audit committees. The findings included in the overview report are not an exhaustive list of all findings, but a summary of the main areas. The audit reports for each local authority deals with the findings and details. Auditors continue to issue unqualified audit opinions on the local authorities' AFS in 2017, with one report containing an emphasis of matter. Our primary sources of information for the overview report are the local authority audited financial statements and the annual audit reports. In conclusion, I hope this overview report gives an insight into the work carried out annually by the Local Government Audit Service, and I look forward to discussing it with you in detail. As Director of Audit, I would like to thank you for inviting myself and my colleague Richard Murphy here today.
Thanks, Niamh. Fergus.
I have to apologise in advance. I have another meeting at 11:30 that I have to go to. But I welcome the auditors here and I welcome the work that they do. I think it's hugely important. I think that it keeps a proper professional eye on the activities and the functions of local government to make sure there's total transparency, accountability, books are kept properly and well, and that any issues that you may find that they're brought to the attention of the individuals and the councils concerned, and that there's a benefit to everybody as a result of that. I just want to ask you about a particular query I made to you, I think it was last year or the year before. It's in relation to a former student of mine who claimed that he was defrauded, and I'm not naming names or even the council here, so I want to be very clear on this. There was a court case, and he was deemed to have, the person was deemed to have, committed a criminal act, and obviously they suffered penalties as a result. But the issue that arose was how the council were able, in the position that they were, what due diligence they did on the contract to make sure that the company that was getting the contract was actually the company that had got it beforehand. And part of the issue was that the same note paper and the same letters, I think, were used in both cases. But basically, a person was defrauded of a sum of money. The criminal justice system dealt with that, but the audit system, how did your audit system deal with that? And I acknowledge, I know that happened, I think it was 2009, it wasn't a recent audit, but it was the outcome of a criminal case. And, how did you deal with that, basically? And I'm not asking you, and I don't expect you to comment on any criminal issues or any matters that might, in any way impinge on anybody's rights or any such things to happen in the future. But how did you deal with that?
Sorry, yeah. Just a very specific case you're referring to, and maybe
Yeah.
Just to, you know, you don't have to answer that, you know, because we're here in relation to the broader text of the work that you do. So
of course, I accept that totally.
And they mightn't be right then to make any comment on that. So I'll leave it.
No, I accept that. If they don't wish to comment, that is I did advise them beforehand that I was going to raise it, and I make it exceptionally clear that I want to know how the audit of a county council didn't pick up this issue. Just hold on a second now, you see, people have to be deemed to be treated fairly and properly. If somebody's agreed,
I don't.
they have every right.
My
they have every right to come.
You're raising a specific case.
Yeah, I am.
We're here dealing with the broader issues.
No, we're dealing with audits. We're dealing specifically. Now, may I be very clear on this?
We're not dealing with specific cases. Then.
No, I'm asking questions in relation to audit reports and management letters in relation to an item I brought to the attention of the. No, I brought this.
But not on the Pacific.
I brought this, Chairman. I brought this to the attention of the Auditor General personally. Right, so that's what I'm dealing with, and I'm looking for the accountability of the narrative of what actions were taken in relation to that. That's all.
They mightn't have that information
but
because nobody was aware that this was going to be raised today. Because we're here.
No, they do have it. I raised it with the person who's present here personally before. Yeah, I mean, it's...
you know, all right.
Okay. I am aware of the case because we have spoke about it previously. We have looked at it as part of the 2017 audit, and we wrote to the person concerned as part of the audit.
Sure.
And as you said, it's obviously an ongoing criminal investigation.
Sure, of course, and I accept that totally.
And the Gardaí are obviously dealing with that case at the moment. So in instances like that, that is the correct course for it to follow. On a wider, if you want to know about how we deal with issues in audit reports, obviously we have a mechanism. We obviously have our audit reports and our management letter. We have a mechanism whereby anything that's raised in those letters is carried forward to the following year, and that would form part of our risk profile for the local authority for that year. So if there's a matter in a local authority, we have a mechanism for tracking that, and we have a mechanism for making sure that we follow up on it, and that is dealt with as part of the audit overall. But in relation to that instance, I am aware of what you're talking about, and we have responded.
The question I have, is there a duty on the local government, wherever it might be it Wicklow or whatever, or Louth or whatever it is?
This is a matter that's before the courts, though.
No, it's not before the courts. It's been dealt with by the courts. There's been a conviction before the courts. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the audit, only the audit. So I'm very careful of my words here. The question I'm asking is there a duty of care on a local government when the auditor comes to inform them that there has been a criminal case during the period of the audit that they're looking at? Are they not obliged to tell you, regardless of the outcome of that case, that there has been a case?
Yeah, we have two systems for dealing with that, Deputy. Yeah. So at the start of each audit, we would meet with obviously the Chief Executive and each of the Directors of Services, and we would go through with them anything that has happened during the year. We obviously go through all of the minutes of senior management team meetings. Right. We go through the council minutes. So we would be aware of anything. We also specifically ask the question of the Chief Executive if there has been any fraud in the local authority during the year. So we would deal with it under that remit, under the remit of fraud. We also speak to people usually like the head of internal audit, or it might be the head of finance about fraud as well. So if there was an instance of fraud or a case like that, the local authority would bring it to our attention.
So what was it, I think this was, say it was 2000, I'm not sure the exact year, was it brought to your attention before I brought it to your attention?
I would have to go back, Deputy, and check the file. 2009 is before my time.
Of course, I accept that. Yeah.
And in reality, we only actually keep records for probably about 7 years. So the earliest I could go back is probably about 2012.
Right.
At this.
And in this particular case, or have you, since you dealt with this matter, is there ongoing process within you? I'm talking about not just the audit, the checks and the balances, the transparency of assessing applications for contracts and so on. Has this changed your view in any way?
We would take no, because we would always have a very robust system in terms of procurement, and you'll see in the overview report, obviously procurement and purchasing would feature heavily within audits. Sure. So each local authority, there would always be a sample picked every year of items which was procured, and we would make sure that they follow, obviously, the legislation and procurement guidelines and the local authorities' own guidelines. But at the end of the day, it is only a sample that we pick. We don't check every single contract.
So in this particular case, or that local authority, did you write any audit reports, or were any management letters issued as a result?
Of
the individual case.
Well, can I ask a question then? Did you issue any audit reports or management letters to any councils for that year?
Every local authority receives an audit report and a management letter each year. So, you know, the items would be...
Are they available to view? Could I see them?
Yes, all of the audit reports are on the department's website. So, and would be for the last number of years.
Could you help me and send me a copy of the one to the county we're talking about?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
For any particular year, Deputy?
Well, we started 2009.
Okay,
From every year from then. Look, I'm only trying to make sure it doesn't happen again like yourself, and that somebody, you know, who's placed in a position that through no fault of yours, lost a very significant amount of business, their whole business gone.
Yeah.
Gone. It's very sad.
Yes, I'll make a note of that and we'll pull together the relevant audit reports.
I have to excuse myself. No, you'll be glad I'm going out the door.
Victor, I'm looking forward to Victor now.
No, I've got to meet somebody else. I'm sorry about this. Apologies. Thank you.
Okay, well, first I want to thank Niamh and Richard for coming along here, and I'm a great supporter of the local government auditing service, and I think, of course, it's an amazing function. I suppose just two things, just in that engagement with Fergus O'Dowd, I heard you say that you actually review council minutes, and that's the first time I knew that, and I think that's a really, really important message to get out there, because throughout any one calendar year, councils will raise issues. I was a councillor for many years in Dunleer, and I would have raised issues, and I used to think, am I mad? Raising these issues, but I'm sort of got great comfort in hearing from you today that actually you look as a part of the process, you look at the things, because where there are diligent councillors, and you'll always find there are councillors who are involved in specific areas, then as County Manager used to say to me, you'll always get that small group of councillors that want to get under the bonnet, who want to know really the governance issues and the real important issues that the public don't necessarily know a lot about. You'll always get a cohort of people who are interested in that, and I'm one of them. So what I want to ask you, just a few things. I want to firstly say, I want to concentrate just on a few things. I looked at your report and I think it's excellent. I also looked at your combined report, which I downloaded from the website. And then I took the thing of taking some random, as auditors would do. I looked at 10 local authorities' reports. And there were a few issues that keep jumping off the page with me. So the first thing I want to just, before I go to that, I want to just say that I think, and it's just a general comment you might take on board, is that the whole public engagement with the auditing process timelines are very tight, and you would be aware that there are statutory notices in most of the provincial and national press asking people, informing people that an audit is taking place next Monday. Now, I saw one last week, I think in Meath Chronicle, where it says, just to give you due notice that an audit is taking place, it'll commence next Monday. Now, this paper came out on the Thursday, and you have a 10-day period. That's far too tight. Now, I'm just going to ask you to look at that again. So here are people buying a weekly provincial paper. It could be the Wicklow Times, it could be anywhere, telling them on a Saturday that on Monday you can go in, and for a very tight time frame, you can pay a few euros to look at the accounts. But for most people, they wouldn't quite understand the whole thing. So I think maybe I just want to send a message. You might look at that, because I think if we're serious about public engagement with the finances and the corporate governance of authorities in terms of transparency and seeking their opinion and their view, all very positive, we must assist them. Many of these people are lay people, they're not financial experts. So I just think that I've heard where people are presented to councils and they're sort of being told they've been making, we don't have the copies of this, or you're making a bit of a nuisance. They don't like people. It's not encouraged. And I think that's a pity, because I think that's something I'd ask you to look at. Then you mentioned the management letters, and again, I picked up that from Fergus' engagement with you. Yes, every local authority gets an audit report. Not every local authority gets a management letter. It does. OK, that's grand. You've confirmed that. Are these management letters sent directly to the councillors? Because what we know from your reports, they're usually sent to the Chief Executive or the Cathaoirleach, but they're not sent directly to the local authority members. The Chief Executives will tell the local authority members invariably that I cannot make that public. until I discuss it with the Audit Committee. And in many cases, the Audit Committees only meet 4 times a year, so they won't be meeting for another 3 months. So we now see a situation, they're running late. You know, these are 2017 audit reports. The councillors are looking at these in 2019. I know it doesn't take 2 years, but it does take 15 months, 18 months. So now there's another deferral. There isn't a proactive response. In some local authorities, they don't like engagement. I was informed about 2 councils. I took the time to go back and look at the webcast of these meetings, where the councils were only discussing these reports briefly for 10 minutes. So I think we need to look at the situation, how that your reports are circulated. I see no reason, and I want you to confirm this to me, I see no reason when you send out your report to the Chief Executive and the Cathaoirleach or the Mayor of the Council that all members of the Council should have it. At that stage it's all done. The Audit Committee cannot adjust or tweak any element of your report. That's fact. So therefore there is no reason, good reason, why all elected members of the councils don't have them. I'd just like you to consider that, to take it on board, because I think it's feedback. Then I'm going to talk just basically about the issue of the fixed asset register. And I picked out, I'm going to give you an example of some comments that are in your reports, and then you talk. I'm not going to identify any of the councils because I think that would be unfair. But you say fixed asset register. A review of the council, this particular council's register of lands and buildings indicates that it has not been properly maintained. It identifies the council assets either incorrectly registered to a third party other than to that particular council, or were never registered in the names of the council. And to give you some examples, and these are direct quotes from your reports, and I quote, a review of historic assets were identified as assets of concern. They were unregistered or were registered to an incorrect party. I've said that already. The council must, you say, or your auditor says, that the council must ensure that it has recorded properly all its title and all its assets, and this hasn't happened. It goes on, and another authority say that the local authority in question did not identify all its way leaves or permissions pertaining to these assets, and the record of registers all of its assets to the property were not complete. You then go on to say in another local authority, a complete process of transferring the title to Irish Water for assets removed from the books of the council, totalling 300 million. That's in your report in relation to Irish Water. This is common, by the way, in relation to transfer of assets belonging to Irish Water, so that's an issue there. Another report talks about you must ensure that all assets are reconciled to the insurance register. This isn't happening in some cases, and this is because to ensure that all these assets are properly insured at year end. And then you draw a reference, of course, to your audit report, where you did a report on the corporate estate governance and management of local authorities, and where a number of your local authorities, our local authorities, are not carrying through on those. You then say, and I'll wrap up on this particular issue, the follow-up progress reports identified by X amount of councils did not have such plans in place, but would commence and have given undertakings that they will do so. And of course, the standard Chief Executive's report to all of these councils that I looked at was, we have a resource problem. Well, we cannot have a situation where Chief Executive tells you, your auditing team, that they have a resource issue. When it comes to millions and millions of pounds of real estate that should be properly registered. In many cases, you've identified, and I want to commend you for your work, you've identified they're not on the insurance, there's insurance issues around them, they're not on the assets registered of the local authority, and this has gone on for years. So I'm not going to ask you, you accept that, you know that to be the case, and a true account of in your reports. I just think that it's an area that I would ask, it's not for me, function, I'm only giving you feedback. I think we need a real focus here. And we need more training, and we need more assistance, and if we need more IT skills, but the mapping of our real estate is really important across the 31 local authorities. Which brings me back to Rebuilding Ireland, the Land Development Agency, and all the various agencies that are now challenged with tapping into the potential of the state's real estate. So you're clearly remit as local authorities, but we would have Irish Rail, we would have ports, we'd have a load of places. So we have vast tracts of land. And in case, I think of my own local authority where there are parklands that are not even registered, no one even seems to know them. So I think there's a massive amount of work to be done, and I've made my point. And then finally, in wrapping up, another area that I've identified that needs looking at is this issue of the companies associated with the council. And we know that a lot of local authorities have wholly owned subsidiary companies, these local authorities, of which the local authority is the sole shareholder. Substantial money is involved here. and in which the chief executive of those local authorities acts as the agent on behalf of the shareholders. But we know these are wholly owned companies by the local authority, dealing in millions and millions of pounds, millions of real estate, and yet we don't seem to know who the agent is, how is the agent accountable to the shareholder. And we now have a situation in local authorities, and I think this is a real challenge in terms of local government auditing, because it's a vast area of assets where these properties are being put at arm's length away from the elected members. And you'll be familiar with the Section 83 disposal, how we dispose properties. We now have a situation where councils, and we can't altogether blame them, the councillors themselves don't always have the expertise. They have the willingness, they have the desire to keep control as part of their elected mandate. But we have these companies that are at arm's length away, where executives are making decisions unknown to the elected members of the council. They are disposing or proposing to dispose of assets of these companies. In some cases, they're disposing of assets that are zoned for residential purposes or potential for residential development. And again, we have an issue. So I'd like to hear, are you planning, because I would again like to suggest to you that there's an area of focus, perhaps in a future audit, that the auditing service would look at these wholly owned subsidiaries and companies. And I note in every audit report, of course, you have at the back a section, please. So that goes from sports and leisure companies to arts theatres and theatres. And there's a lot of problems around these issues in terms of accountability and good governance. That's not to suggest there's any other thing wrong, although you have mentioned, and again, I don't want to go into the specifics of that. So I really think I'll wrap up on those 2 points. Just one or two things. In terms of resources, do you believe you have sufficient resources to carry out what is a very, very onerous task? A lot of work is required, so you might comment on that. And then finally, the issue of in terms of, the Public Accounts Committee, have you any view, or should you have a view? Maybe you don't want to share that view, and I understand that too. The Public Accounts Committee, or is there some forum that we can bring the accounting officers, because it's all about accountability at the end of the day. And what I'm picking up from your audit reports for years is that you're doing excellent work, you're identifying weaknesses, but you're getting the usual message from the chief executive saying we don't have the resources. And I don't think you have enough teeth, enough sanction. And while you identify the problems, you identify the weaknesses, but somehow this thing and it's about accountability. And chief executives are very well paid. Yes, it's an onerous task, but they don't take personal responsibility. They're not personally held accountable for issues around this whole area. And I think in private sector business they would, because there are consequences when people fail in the private sector. And I'm not convinced there are sufficient consequences for chief executives in relation to failures that may be found, having gone through due process. I'm not judging anyone, but through due process. So in terms of the Public Accounts Committee or some other Controller Auditor General's office, and you might tell us your relationship with them, actually, I'd be very interested to hear that, but the Controller and Auditor General's office, is there a mechanism that we can elevate your excellent work? Have you any ideas about possible alternatives where we can elevate your work and have a public forum where we bring in chief executives to a public forum and we ask them and hold them to account on the key issues and recommendations that your office makes? I'm suggesting going beyond that, but areas that you deal with, and I'd be really interested in it. But look, well done in your work. I think it's really important work. I think just the follow-on, my concern is how can we follow on and hold the people that should be held to account for the public? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. I suppose I might just take each of the points that you raised in sequence. So, based the first point just in regards to the circulation of our audit reports, this is actually an issue I have raised myself because we work under a very tight deadline to have all of our audits finished by the 31st of October each year. So the audits for the 31st of December 2018 are now ongoing, and they're all forecast at the moment to be finished by the 31st of October. So we work under a very tight schedule in order to achieve those deadlines and to get our reports out. But as you say, we have a mechanism whereby we send them to the Chief Executive and the Head of Finance, and the sequence on from that is where, we have very different plans put in place by local authorities. So we've some local authorities who, the minute we send out their audit report, put it up on their own website and give us permission to put it up on the department's website, and they circulate it to the council in the next council pack. We have other local authorities, as you said, wait until it goes to the audit committee. Then there's obviously a time delay because the audit committee have to prepare a report, and that has to go back to council. And for us, that is not satisfactory, because, you know, what we're doing then is we're looking at December 2017 accounts in 2019, so it is too out of date, and the issues then have become dated as well for the councillors. So ideally we would like to see it circulated. There is 2 pieces of legislation that cover the issuance of our audit reports. So there is the legislation that's where we say we have to send our audit report to the Chief Executive, and then there's also the legislation for the audit committees that say the audit committee must consider our report. The problem is the 2 pieces of legislation stand alone, and there isn't a sequencing within that legislation that the local authorities must follow. So to resolve the issue, I have actually raised it with the CCMA and the Heads of Finance, and the department are now looking at it to put together some guidance for local authorities as to what should happen on receipt of our audit reports. But ideally, I would like for it to be circulated within a very short time frame from us issuing it, so that the issues can be actioned in a timely manner. The second point you raised was just in terms of the management letters. So when an issue is raised as part of the audit, it either ends up in the audit report or the management letter, and how we decide where it ends up is based on the priority we would give it and the rating. So all of our issues we would rate either high, medium or low, and we would also rank those. So the most important issues end up in the audit report, and then the other issues end up in the management letter. And the format of the management letter is such that we set out the issue, the implication of that issue, we set out what we believe is our recommendation, we rank that issue, and then we ask management for a response and also a time frame by which they will address the issue. And then we follow up, obviously, on that time frame in the next audit. I know that the audit committees, a lot of the audit committees are receiving the management letter now as well. And what I know from speaking to the audit committees is that they are using our issues and putting them into a template and tracking those as part of their audit committee meetings as well. And they've actually, some audit committees are now actually calling in members of the senior management team to talk about issues in our audit report or management letter and see what progress has been made. And obviously we would welcome that, because that obviously is another resource looking at the issue in order to move, to have it resolved. In terms of fixed assets, Senator, obviously it is an area we would look at. As you said, it is a high value of assets. Obviously some of the fixed assets are covered by things like roads and parks, but obviously our main concern is land and buildings, because obviously those were the areas that we would concentrate on. And as you said, all of the issues, if you look at page 39 of our summary report, all of the issues are listed there. It is important to note that while some of the issues come up year after year, there is some progress being made in those issues. So you will see from audit reports as well, and it is summarised there on page 39, that there is progress being made. But the problem is that a lot of these issues are legacy issues, and as you say, it's a legal issue that they have to, find the legal title, they have to map it. A lot of the local authorities are using things like GIS and technology to help them progress that, but there is a lot of work still to be done in that area, and obviously we would welcome any progress that the local authority is able to make in that area. The fourth point, just that you had raised there, were companies. This comes up every year. There is a separate appendix 8 at the back of the AFS, where the local authority has to list all of the companies, and we would obviously audit that as part of it. So what we would ask for the audited accounts for those local authorities. We would look at the audit report, we would look at any guarantees given by the council, and we have raised all of those issues, and obviously we have a number of concerns about those companies. As you say, the lack of governance sometimes extending to these companies, the lack of control sometimes, they're operating at deficits, and the council has guaranteed their funding, or they owe large amounts to the councils. So we too have concerns that we raise. If it is a very substantial company, in terms of some of these are small companies, they're set up for, maybe swimming pools and stuff, but some are very substantial companies, as you said, that hold real estate. And in that case, we would do a lot more work on those companies in terms of the figures behind the accounts. And I know the auditors would sometimes meet with the board of those companies as well and look at board minutes and stuff to make sure we have reflected any concerns that we have in our audit reports as well. You asked me about the resources that we have. We have 32 staff at the moment. We are currently running at about 4 or 5 vacancies. We do find it difficult to attract staff because of the economic conditions in the major cities. So it is something that we have dealt with last year and this year, and we deal with it through the use of secondment staff from the accountancy firms at the moment, but it's not something that we would like to continue, and we're obviously working with the department in deeper to try and address those shortfalls that we have. Audit is obviously our priority, so our focus each year is to make sure all of the audited financial statements are completed by the 31st of October. If we have extra days, then we would use those for value for money. So if we don't have enough staff, we don't undertake as much value for money work as we would in years where we are at full complements. You asked me as well about accountability, and I know NOAC spoke about this before as well, about having more oversight and accountability. There is mechanisms that work. Obviously, we have the audit committees, which we can see, are obviously up and running now a few years, but definitely I can see in the last 2 to 3 years, in terms of their format and how they approach it, and as I said, tracking the issues. Obviously, NOAC, we link in very closely with NOAC, so we agree our programme of work in terms of value for money with NOAC in advance, and they inform us as to what areas they are looking at. We undertook 4 reports last year on what we would consider to be audit issues. So we looked at unfunded balances, we looked at rates, we looked at loans, and we looked at the pensions, the cost of pensions in local authorities. And we did that in consultation with NOAC as to areas that they would like to see and audit issues that we had seen coming up. So we do ask them for input into our work plan as well in terms of the value for money. The relationship with the CNAG, we are actually part of a group called the PAF, which is the Public Audit Forum, and it's made up of audit bodies in the UK, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and the CAG. So we get together and we share thinking in terms of emerging trends like data analytics. We look at best practice in areas. And on top of that, I would meet with one of the directors from the CNAG as well periodically to talk about things such as training, work practices, things like that, just how we can share best practice.
Could I just ask just 2 little points I would say to us? I really think that's very helpful what you've said there, and I suppose really just to wrap up, I would like to suggest, and it's only a suggestion because I have no statutory function over all of this, but I'd like to suggest 3 things going forward that you might consider in your next audit. The ticking bomb of pensions and in terms of the value and the cost to local authorities, because that's what it is. So I think that's something that needs a special report. Secondly, the issue of the lands and the assets register, and if there's needs for additional training and resources or whatever, but I think it's a specialist area. I think technology would really crack a lot of that for you in time. And there are multi-agencies doing that, so I think that's an area that needs a special report. And finally, the issue of this, the councils, these private companies, these wholly owned companies that are associated with the council in terms of their governance and accountability to the elected members of a council that are ultimately charged with that. There are 3 areas that I think, having looked at a lot of your audit reports for this particular period that we're dealing with here today, that are jumping off the pages as areas where alarm bells need to be ringing. And I think, but that's your matter, how you do your work, I think there are 3 areas that I'd like to look at again. I'll certainly be keeping a keen eye to the next audit reports, but I think there are 3 areas where we need some work, and maybe special reports done. So you do special reports, and these are areas that you might consider. But listen, well done, and thanks for coming into us.
Thank you. Actually draw your attention, Senator. There is a report, and I can send you a copy of it, on pensions. We did a special report that just came out before Christmas on pensions, and what it looked at was the number of pensioners, what is being paid out each year in pensions. It looked at the actuarial review carried out by DEEPR for local authorities as to the overall liability. So we actually have done a very detailed report on pensions and the pension gap in local authorities, the gap between the income that's coming in and the expenditure going out. So I can send you a copy of that. And in relation to land and asset registers and local authorities companies, that is an area that we are already looking at as part of the 2018 audits. So it will appear again for 2019.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And maybe if you could send that report into the Secretariat, they would distribute it to all the members of the committee, because I think it's a valuable piece of report.
There was 4 reports done, so I might send you all 4 reports.
And then we can give it out to all the members. Having served on an audit committee in Wicklow, I can confirm that we were always shown the management letter from the auditors, and in fairness, it did give you a greater insight of what the thinking behind the report was, and was always a valuable piece of information. You have mentioned, and Victor has mentioned, the pensions, because it is a recurring issue at every budget process now in every local authority, the cost of the pensions, and an ongoing issue. So I haven't read that report, so I would look forward to that report. Just, I suppose, in relation to a few areas of concern, although when you, in the report, when you look at the number of areas of concerns, there's not a whole lot not in it. It nearly covers almost everything, you know what I mean, from unfunded capital balance, capital projects, loans payable, development contributions, and so on. Is there a trend in any, from all the local authorities, of 1 or 2 of these items that occur in every local authority, or is each local authority different, or is there areas specific that we should be trying to focus in on in relation to areas of concern around that? And having gone through 12 estimate processes every year in late November, now since the property tax has come in, we still sit on the last week waiting for the phone call from the department to say, well, 1, your local government fund will be in or about the same as last year. But the huge area that we local authorities take a gamble on is the grants. And the grants, for whether it be for Rosa or whatever it is, we always take a punt on that. Oh, listen, we'll get what we got last year, or, you know, we'll budget for a 5% increase and hopefully we'll get that. Is that the right way of doing businesses? I suppose I'm asking from another point of view. Is there a more transparent way of dealing with that issue? And I suppose the other thing, and it's a thing that I have a concern about, is that once again we've kicked the local property tax review down the road again. Wicklow's currently going through a commercial rate review that hasn't happened for 40 years, and the implications on that are unbelievable on some businesses. Now we haven't done a local property tax review for over 5 years now, and it seems to be going the same way. And we've thousands of properties now that are paying absolutely nothing in property tax that could help fund local authorities. So maybe if you could give me a view just on them few things. Thanks very much.
In terms of areas that occur in each local authorities, we ask that the local government auditors comment on certain things in each audit report. So we would always ask for financial standing is commented on. We also ask for income collection is commented on, because obviously those are massive areas in the local authority. The transfer to Irish Water is another area, and then the governance arrangements in terms of internal audit, the audit committees and local authority companies. Outside of those areas, obviously the local government auditor then can, deal with the issues that they feel are relevant. But there is items that occur in a lot of local authorities just by very virtue of their nature. So things like fixed assets, procurement and purchasing will also usually appear, and usually something in the area of unfunded balances or development contributions appear in the majority of audit reports. And I suppose that's just by the very nature of the topics that they are, as well. In terms of budgeting, obviously we do look at the budgeting, we look at the budget that the local authority prepare each year, and then we look at how actual turned out compared to budget. How the local authority actually go about preparing their budget, that would be outside of our remit, to have a look at that. But I would have thought finance have built up a lot of knowledge, in terms of how, what does come in, and I suppose those people are working with the different departments that award the grants, so they would have a history there as well. In terms of one of the special reports we did wasn't in the area of LPT, but was in the area, we were just talking about properties not being captured in the area of rates, and obviously there is properties as well that are either awaiting valuation, and there's a loss of income there as well to the local authorities. So we did look at that area. Obviously LPT is a policy matter, so we would only look at how, the amount that's being reflected in the financial statements, how is that being, has that been reflected accurately? But in terms of the LPT and properties being revalued, obviously, we would just look at how the policy is implemented, so we would.
All right, okay. I would like to thank Niamh and Richard for attending today and engaging with the committee. The meeting is now adjourned, and the next meeting of the Joint Committee will be held next Wednesday, the 15th of May, at 9:30 a.m. Thank you very much. All right.